Just so you know, there are some very heavy copyright restrictions on this IP. And at the risk of losing my tiny channel to forces that be, I gotta say, my face, unfortunately, will have to be enough. If it helps, imagine I have pointed ears and a miniskirt or something. Anyways, let's get to it. When I finally get a little time to myself, I like to unwind with some anime. And recently, I carved out a bit of time for myself to revisit a Japanese classic, Record of Lodoss War. Now, Lodoss was huge for me growing up. It shaped the imagery that fueled my tabletop RPG hobby, after all. Yeah, no kidding. So, with Japan's recent wave of fantasy hits, Delicious in Dungeon, Freyrin, and, well, everything else, it felt like the perfect moment to go back. And after 4 episodes, I stopped. The nostalgia was there, but the pacing, the storytelling, the slow animation, it hasn't aged as gracefully as I'd hoped. And that made me unexpectedly blue. Well, sad. Disappointed? Whatever. You get it. My first thought was, why hasn't this been remade? And that, my friends, that reaction, that instinct comes from the Western side of me. Because in the West, when something beloved starts to show its age, the natural response is, let's remake it. Just like we want to do with the original Star Wars, right? Japan doesn't always think that way. Or does it? Before we get into that, let's step back a little bit. For anyone who hasn't seen it, Record of Lodoss War is one of the earliest fully realized fantasy epics in Japanese animation. It was built directly from tabletop role-playing replay logs, which already makes it unusual, and it leaned into classical fantasy. Flawed heroes, moral stakes, gods and demons, cats and dogs living together, shaping the world. Long before overpowered superheroic protagonists and comedy-driven emo harem-themed light novels took over, Lodoss was serious, atmospheric, and mythic. It wasn't just another fantasy anime. It became a blueprint of sorts, a demonstration of how Japan could tell epic fantasy with weight and consequence. And that's part of why its absence feels strange. In Japan, Lodoss occupies a very specific cultural moment. JRPGs like Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy had already introduced Western-style fantasy, but early hardware limited how much those worlds could be shown. Sprites and simple illustrations hinted at elves and dwarves, but everything else was abstract. Then Lodoss arrived. It was one of the first works to render that style of fantasy with detail and seriousness. It showed Japanese audiences what a fully realized Western-style fantasy world could look like. It became a gateway, a bridge between tabletop imagination and animated storytelling. Meanwhile, in the West, Lodoss hit a completely different audience. Like me. Most Dungeons & Dragons materials at the time were black and white sketches. The D&D childlike cartoon existed, but it didn't quite capture the grounded tone tabletop players really wanted. So when Lodoss appeared, fully animated with proper armor and shoulder pads. It's the 80s, right? Proper clerics, proper elves. It felt validating. It looked like the world's Western players were already imagining at their tables. It had the seriousness Western animation rarely attempted. We were still swinging on our spiderwebs in the clouds, folks. For many of us, Lodoss wasn't just an anime. It was the first time our tabletop worlds were brought to life. Put together, these two receptions, Japan and the West, explain why Lodoss still echoes through fantasy media today. You can see its fingerprints in JRPG aesthetics, anime party dynamics, and the visual vocabulary of Japanese fantasy. Lodoss didn't just adapt fantasy, it helped define how fantasy looks in Japanese media. And that legacy makes its current status even more curious. Rewatching Lodoss today, you can feel it's off. The original OVA is visually iconic, but its pacing comes from replay logs, not a unified narrative. Later adaptations tried to refine things, but the result is a fragmented canon. There's no single definitive version of Lodoss to this date. Meanwhile, fantasy storytelling has evolved. Audiences expect richer world building, cohesive arcs, and animation that carries emotional weight. Lodoss has the bones of a timeless epic, but the versions we have don't fully realize that potential. So, back to the original question. Why hasn't it been revisited? To answer that, we need to step away from it again and zoom out. In Japan, foundational works are often treated as fixed artifacts, not to be replaced but preserved. Like World Heritage Sites and the like. Think of Akira, or Studio Ghibli films like Nausicaa or Mononoke or Spirited Away. These aren't remade, they're curated. When stories are revisited, it's usually through the media mix model. New manga, new novels, new games, side stories that coexist with the original rather than overwrite it. Remakes do happen, but mostly in science fiction, where technology naturally invites reinterpretation. Fantasy, by contrast, is treated as mythic. Once a version exists, it becomes part of a cultural memory, and Lodoss seems to sit in that space, honored and almost sacred. So, what do you think? Can Hollywood learn from something like this? In the West, remakes are driven by market logic. Familiar brands, built-in audiences, nostalgia. Also, to put it bluntly, money, money, money. It makes the world turn round. Japan's slower, more reverent approach protects the classics, but it also seals them off, even when a new version might reveal something the original couldn't. Somewhere between renewal and restraint, there's a balance that's worth considering. If there's ever a model for how Japan can remake a classic with care, it's Space Battleship Yamamoto 2199, or simply Yamamoto. It's honored the original. It's modernized the storytelling, it clarified the themes, and it's one of my all-time favorites. It didn't overwrite the classic, it brought it to life. And Lodoss, given its early role in shaping Japan's fantasy imagination, arguably deserves the same treatment, doesn't it? So, let's imagine for a moment a Lodoss remake that draws directly from the novels, offers a unified narrative, embraces grounded atmospheric tone, uses modern animation techniques, and gives battles the real weight and choreography needed, right? Think of the fluidity you see in Shangri-La Frontier, another of my favorites. Think of the prestige level production value anime is now capable of. The goal wouldn't be to replace the original. It would be to create a new point of entry, one that honors the past while letting the story come to life once again. And honestly, the timing feels right. Fantasy is thriving globally. Anime production values are higher than ever. Nostalgia cycles are pulling older works back into conversation anyway. Lodoss is still respected, but it risks fading out entirely. A remake isn't inevitable, but the cultural moment feels right. This is the time, and sadly, I feel it is only my small voice saying, "Come on, boys and girls, one more time before I kick the bucket." I got gray. Lodoss sits at a strange crossroads. It helped define how Japan imagined Western fantasy. It bridged tabletop improvisation and animation. It shaped two cultures in different ways. And yet, it remains frozen in time. Maybe that's appropriate. Some stories earn their place by staying exactly as they are. But others find new life when a new generation takes a fresh look. So the real question isn't, should Lodoss be remade? It's, is there value in returning to a world that meant so much to so many? And what might we discover if Lodoss were allowed to live again?